Your standards are too low. That is not an insult. That is a diagnosis. And until you accept it, nothing changes. You don't rise to the level you want, you fall to the level you tolerate. What you allow becomes your normal. What you repeat becomes your identity. Most people don't fail because life is unfair. They fail because they negotiate with weakness every single day and call it balance. Look at your results. They are honest, they don't lie. If your income is average, your standards are average. If your body is weak, your standards are weak. If your focus is broken, your standards are broken. Results are not opinions. Results are receipts. And right now, your receipts are telling you the truth you've been avoiding. You don't need more motivation. You don't need a better plan. You don't need a new year or a fresh start. You need higher standards. Standards for how early you wake up. Standards for how long you work when you're tired. Standards for how much pressure you can handle without complaining. Standards for what you say no to, even when it feels uncomfortable. Most people live at the level of convenience. They choose what feels good instead of what works. They stop when it gets hard instead of pushing when it matters. They quit mentally long before they quit physically. And then they wonder why nothing changes. Nothing changes because comfort is in control. Comfort is the enemy of standards. Comfort whispers excuses and makes them sound reasonable. Comfort says you've done enough when you barely started. Comfort tells you to slow down when you should be speeding up. And if you keep listening to comfort, your standards will keep dropping until average feels impressive. High standards require discipline. Discipline is the ability to act without debate, to do what needs to be done regardless of mood, energy, or emotion. Discipline doesn't care how you feel. Discipline cares about what gets done. And people with high standards don't wait to feel ready. They move first. They adjust later. If you only work when you feel motivated, your standards are low. If you only train when you feel energized, your standards are low. If you only focus when conditions are perfect, your standards are low. High standards mean you perform even when everything inside you wants to quit. Most people lower their standards to protect their ego. They don't want to feel uncomfortable. They don't want to face the gap between who they are and who they could be. So they shrink the goal, they soften the rule, they justify the shortcut, and they stay exactly where they are. Raising your standards will make you uncomfortable. That's the point. Growth feels like pressure. Progress feels like resistance. If it feels easy, you are not raising anything. You are repeating what you already know how to do. And repetition without challenge leads to stagnation. You say you want more, but your daily actions say you're fine with less. You say you want to win, but your habits say you're okay with average. You say you want change, but your routine says you prefer familiarity. Your life follows your actions, not your words. Standards are not what you say you want. Standards are what you accept daily. The quality of your conversations, the quality of your effort, the quality of your focus, the quality of your discipline, that is the real measure. If you tolerate being late, you tolerate being sloppy. If you tolerate distraction, you tolerate weakness. If you tolerate excuses, you tolerate failure. Everything is connected. Low standards in small things create low standards in big things. High performers don't wait for accountability. They build it, they don't wait for structure. They create it, they don't wait for discipline. They demand it from themselves. No one has to push them because their standards pull them forward. You don't need someone to believe in you. You need to stop betraying yourself. Every time you quit early, you teach yourself that your word doesn't matter. Every time you delay action, you reinforce weakness. Every time you choose comfort, you lower the bar. Raising your standards starts with brutal honesty. Stop lying to yourself about effort. Stop pretending you're doing everything you can. Stop blaming circumstances for habits you refuse to change. The truth is uncomfortable, but it's powerful. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. High standards demand consistency, not intensity. Anyone can go hard for a day. Anyone can feel inspired for a week. Very few can show up relentlessly when the excitement is gone. That's where standards separate winners from talkers. You don't need to do everything. You need to do the right things at a higher level, with more focus, more pressure, more precision, more discipline. Doing more with low standards won't fix anything. Doing fewer things with higher standards changes everything. Most people quit because they expect results too soon. Their standards for patience are low. They want progress without process, growth without grind, mastery without repetition. That fantasy keeps them stuck. Raising your standards means raising your tolerance for boredom, for repetition, for silence, for doing the same hard things again and again without praise. That is what real progress looks like. It's not exciting, it's effective. If you want a different life, you need different rules. Rules that don't bend when emotions show up. Rules that don't disappear when things get hard. Rules that force you to act even when you don't feel like it. Standards are rules you enforce on yourself. No one else can do it for you. No one else will hold the line if you don't demand. More from yourself. Life won't either. Life responds to pressure, not potential. Potential means nothing without standards. Everyone has potential. Very few have the discipline to raise their standards high enough to use it. That's why potential stays wasted. Look at where you're inconsistent. That's where your standards are lowest. Look at what you avoid. That's where your standards collapse. Look at what you complain about. That's where you've stopped taking responsibility. Responsibility and standards rise together. The more responsibility you accept, the higher your standards become. The more you blame, the lower they drop. Blame weakens. Responsibility sharpens. You don't rise by accident. You rise by decision. A decision to stop tolerating what no longer serves you. A decision to stop negotiating with weakness. A decision to raise the bar and hold it there day after day. Raising your standards will cost you comfort. It may cost you people. It may cost you habits you've grown attached to. It may cost you excuses you've relied on. But it will give you something far more valuable. Control. Control over your time. Control over your effort. Control over your future. That control is earned, not given. And it starts with one choice repeated relentlessly. This is not about perfection. It's about elevation. Raising the floor so low days are still disciplined. So tired days are still productive. So bad moods don't control behavior. That's what high standards do. They protect progress when motivation disappears. You don't need to feel ready to raise your standards. You raise them first. Readiness comes later. Confidence comes later. Results come later. Action comes now. Stop asking if you can do more. Decide that you must. Stop wondering if it's worth it. Decide that staying where you are is unacceptable. Stop waiting for a signal. This is it. Your standards are too low. And until you raise them, nothing else matters. And when you raise your standards, you must understand this clearly. There is no return to who you were before. Higher standards demand a different identity. You cannot think the same, move the same, react the same, and expect elevated results. Standards are not a switch you flip once. They are a pressure you live under daily. Execution is where most people collapse. They like the idea of high standards, but they resist the behavior that proves them. They want the label without the load. They want to say they're disciplined, focused, serious, driven, but they disappear the moment pressure shows up. Real standards are proven when no one is watching and nothing is exciting. You don't rise because you understand standards. You rise because you enforce them. Enforcement is uncomfortable. It requires saying no when it would be easier to say yes. It requires doing the hard thing when the easy thing is available. It requires showing up when excuses feel logical. That's where identity is built. Your identity is not what you claim. Your identity is what you repeatedly do under pressure when things get hard. Your real standards show up, not your motivational quotes, not your plans, your habits. Most people fail at execution Because they underestimate consistency. They think intensity will carry them. It won't. Intensity burns out. Consistency compounds. High standards are not about going extreme once. They're about refusing to go average every day. You don't need perfect execution. You need relentless execution. Done is better than perfect. Progress is better than pause. Movement beats thinking. Thinking too much is often just fear dressed as intelligence. Pressure is not your enemy. Pressure reveals who you really are. Weak standards crack under pressure. Strong standards harden. That's why pressure is necessary. Without pressure, standards stay theoretical. If you avoid pressure, you avoid growth. If you avoid responsibility, you avoid control. If you avoid discipline, you avoid results. Every avoidance lowers your standards, whether you admit it or not. High standards mean you don't wait for clarity. You act with imperfect information. You don't wait for confidence. You build it through action. You don't wait for permission. You move because you decided. Decision is the turning point. Most people keep their standards low because they never fully decide. They leave the door open for retreat. They leave room for excuses. They leave themselves an escape route. High standards close the door. No exit, no backup plan that leads back to comfort. When you decide, execution becomes non-negotiable. You stop asking how you feel and start asking what needs to be done. Feelings becomes the filter. Consistency is boring. That's why it works. It doesn't rely on emotion. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't care about mood. It just keeps moving forward. And forward motion, even slow, destroys stagnation. Most people quit because they expect momentum to feel exciting. It doesn't. Momentum feels heavy at first. It feels repetitive. It feels lonely. That's why standards matter. Standards keep you moving when motivation fades. Your environment will test your standards. Distractions will challenge them. People around you will question them. That is normal. High standards make average people uncomfortable. Not because you're better, but because you remind them of what they're avoiding. Do not lower your standards to make others comfortable. That is how ambition dies. That is how discipline erodes. That is how potential gets buried. You are not here to fit in. You are here to perform. Performance requires separation. Separation from excuses. Separation from noise. Separation from comfort-driven thinking. Responsibility sharpens standards. The more responsibility you take, the less room there is for excuses. The less room there is for excuses, the higher your standards must rise to survive. Responsibility forces growth. Stop outsourcing responsibility to circumstances. Stop blaming time, energy, people, or luck. Every excuse you accept lowers your standards. Every responsibility you accept raises them. Identity follows behavior. If you want to become disciplined, act disciplined before you feel disciplined. If you want higher standards, behave as if they already exist. Standards are installed through repetition, not belief. You don't need to believe in yourself. You need to obey the process. Belief grows from evidence. Evidence comes from action. Action comes from discipline. Discipline comes from standards. High standards remove decision fatigue. When standards are clear, there is no debate. You don't ask if you should work. You work. You don't ask if you should train. You train. You don't ask if you should focus. You focus. Low standards invite negotiation. Negotiation invites delay. Delay kills momentum. Momentum kills doubt. That is the chain. If you feel stuck, your standards are unclear. If you feel overwhelmed, your standards are inconsistent. If you feel frustrated, your standards are not being enforced. Clarity creates speed. Standards create clarity. When you know what is acceptable and what is not, action becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. You don't rise by doing extraordinary things occasionally. You rise by doing ordinary things extraordinarily well. That is the discipline gap. That is where standards separate outcomes. High standards mean you finish what you start. You don't quit because it's hard. You don't quit because progress is slow. You don't quit because no one notices. You finish because that's who you decided to be. Quitting teaches weakness. Finishing teaches strength. Strength compounds. Weakness spreads. Your past does not matter here. Your excuses do not matter here. Your current results are not a life sentence. But your standards, if left unchanged, are. Raising standards is not a motivational act. It is a structural one. You redesign how you live, how you schedule, how you work, how you decide. Systems enforce standards when emotions fail. Emotion will fail. Motivation will fade. Energy will fluctuate. Standards must remain fixed. This is not about being extreme. This is about being exact. Exact with time, exact with effort, exact with focus, exact with execution. Precision beats chaos every time. If you want to win, raise your standards above your feelings. If you want control, raise your standards above your excuses. If you want consistency, raise your standards above your comfort. There is a cost. There is always a cost. Comfort costs potential. Discipline costs comfort. Choose wisely, and once you raise the bar, you don't lower it on bad days. You don't lower it when things go wrong. You don't lower it when progress feels slow. You hold it steady. That is where identity is forged. This is where most people stop, not because they can't go further, but because higher standards expose who they really are. And not everyone is willing to face that. But if you are, then you already know the truth. Nothing changes until you do. Nothing rises until standards rise. Nothing improves until discipline becomes the rule, not the exception. And if you keep going from here, there is only one direction left,